it was more marijuana, and then I did a lot of I did a lot of acid and psilocybin and that kind of stuff.
All the stuff they're recommending today.
All the stuff, yeah, that's right. But there was no therapeutic dose for me. I don't know what that was.
If you're doing it every day, it's not microdosing.
Yeah, that's right.
You just put it out there. Did I screw that up?
And you can get Listen Up for only $14.99.
Well, I'm really excited today for this conversation, Linda. I've in kind of talking even before we started this. There's some background connection we have, and where our families are from in Albuquerque, and knowing each other kind of at Mercy Street and all of those things. So I've been excited.
All those years ago.
Yeah. It kind of feels like both another life and really the start of a life, for me.
Yeah.
And, so grateful
Definitely.
for it. Yeah. So I
thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Well, thank you. You're so important to so many people that I know and that I have been connected to. I heard your name a lot, and just folks that kind of come into my office for 1,000 different reasons and began to hear your name in different settings, and then got to know what you do. And so I would just like to start out by just asking you a part of your story, like what brought you to this point in your life today.
Thank you, Matt. I appreciate it. I really appreciate being asked to be here and feel honored. And I've been a fan of yours for a long time.
Well, thank you. It's going to become a new ringtone, Linda, thank you.
That'll work. Yeah, so, I kind of, when I think about my story, my recovery story, I think about it in terms of awarenesses, pretty much, because I think, how did you put it? That it was, everything was hidden way deep in my subconscious, right?
Yeah, right.
Before recovery. But I remember when I was 16, my brother was killed in an auto accident. Oh. And which kind of was the first time that I had my eyes opened up to a few things. And one of those was our spirituality, that we were more than just our mechanical body. I just knew for the first time that there was more to us, that we had a spirit, and that spirit lived on, even if our body was gone. And that was the first time I knew it from a gut level. I was not raised in my parents didn't go to church, didn't believe, kind of sort of believed maybe there was a God, but didn't ever talk about it. So I didn't have any background in religion or spirituality at all. Raised in New Mexico, and so there was, some spirituality around the Native Americans and that type of stuff. But I really didn't know much about it. And so when my brother died, it was just a huge awakening for me, and it sent me on a search for what God meant to me.
Yeah.
So that started me on my spiritual journey.
How old were you when he passed?
16.
How
was
old was
16. He was 18. He was 2 years older. And we were very, very close growing up.
Dear Lord.
He was, what I found out after he died was that he was on heroin. And the auto accident, they didn't do any drug testing, but I am sure it was a result of his use, his heroin use. And he was pretty distraught around that time anyway. So that was, that was a little turning point for me, because I grew up in a family that drank all the time, and all of their friends did. And so I grew up with drinking being normal. And my brother introduced me to drugs when I was about 13. And so we together were drinking and using drugs. And so we had, all of his friends were my friends. And so I kind of grew up with that. Parents drinking, all of their friends drinking, and then my brother using drugs, and me, he did not introduce me to heroin or cocaine or any of that. It was more marijuana, and then I did a lot of I did a lot of acid and psilocybin and that kind of stuff.
All the stuff they're recommending today.
All the stuff, yeah, that's right. But there was no therapeutic dose for me. I don't know what that was.
If you're doing it every day, it's not microdosing.
Yeah, that's right.
You just put it out there.
Yeah, and if you're using it in, larger quantities.
Wow.
Yeah.
So, let me just pause. 13 was your first onset of use.
Correct. Yeah.
I want to let that sink into my own body for a second, because I think about my own kids who were 13 once.
Right.
And kids I love, that are 13 now, and just think, wow, what is going on, that is something that,
Well, it certainly made me an overprotective mother. I know what you might be doing out there.
Welcome to Stalag Mom.
That's right. I will be on top of it.
Yes.
Ooh, I got some stories to tell about that. So that's right. And once my brother died, I dropped the drugs. All drugs were bad in my book after that. However, I never considered alcohol a drug. And so that was, of course, my drug of choice, as it was with the rest of my family. One of the things the other thing that happened for me that raised some awareness was the awareness of my need for some support. Because my parents were both alcoholic. And, Mom would come home, eat dinner, and pass out on the couch. Dad worked out of town, came home, and they drank on the weekends. We used to pick him up at the airport every Friday night, and we always had to stop at the bar when we picked him up at the airport. Then you could go in and watch the plane land, right? And watch him get off the plane. And then we'd stop at the bar, and he'd have a drink, and then we always had to have a beer in the car for him. So that, that was
the good old days.
That's right.
When you could drink and drive, folks.
And nobody even cared.
Nobody cared.
In fact, they were all doing it.
Yeah.
Well, at least in my world.
That's when buzz driving wasn't drunk driving.
That's right. That's right. Yeah, so that was kind of my world. And then when my brother died, my parents never, Mom always told me that some people need to talk to other people, but we have broad shoulders, her and I, right? So we are the women of the family. We have the broadest shoulders, and so we don't need that kind of thing. And my father was so distraught and worried about my mother that we were not even allowed to mention my brother's name after he died. So there was no support, no. I don't know why I've been working on this for years. But there was no support. There was nothing there. What they did do was they took me to the family doctor and got me a prescription of Xanax. And so what happened, it really ended up being a good thing for me, because what happened was the bottle of Xanax had to stay with the school nurse in case I needed it during the day. And I would go to the school nurse, and she would engage me in conversation. Oh. And that was the only support that I knew. The only time I could talk about what was going on inside and a little bit about what was going on outside in my world. And so, I remember I was 16 at that time, thinking my goal in life is to become a counselor for teenagers.
So you're with the school nurse, and that's the thought you have, is I want to be what I'm being given.
Exactly.
At this moment. Wow.
Because I knew the need. And, what if someone had been there for my brother?
Oh, right.
Right? What if there would have been PADAP in my town? Right? George Youngblood,
Right. Teen Family Services.
Yeah.
Right.
If he had had that,
Archway
no
Academy,
telling what could have happened, right?
Yeah.
However, I knew that was, at that time, that was what I wanted to do. So those two awarenesses came out of that. There was several, I went on drinking, and when I was about 18, I had my second, but I had a very serious bout of depression and became suicidal And because of that experience I had with the school nurse, I looked up the county hospital, and I went to the county hospital and said, I want to hurt myself. And so they saw me. It was, I don't know, late in the evening. They saw me, offered me to spend the night if I wanted to. I mean, it was just a very nurturing, loving experience for me.
Wow.
And I continued to go see them for a while, talked to Mom and Dad about it. Mom said, don't tell anybody. Don't tell anyone you're doing that. We shouldn't need that, right? That was my parents' response. But for me, I knew it was helpful. And I did that for a little while, and what it did was it put a Band-Aid on me, right? I didn't dig into any of the stuff, but it put a Band-Aid on. The other thing I didn't do was tell her how much I was drinking, and she didn't ask, which is the other question that we should always ask. Doctors should ask. Everyone should ask, especially if someone goes in and says they're depressed.
All right.
Talk about, ask about what they're using. What are they using to sleep? What are you drinking? What are, how much and how often? Those are really vital questions that don't get asked.
That's interesting. That's really true, isn't it?
Yeah.
To be super curious about where that takes you.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So put a little Band-Aid on it. I got pregnant with my daughter when I was 20, and her father chose not to be involved. And so her and I became, I was a single mom, and it was her and I. And when she was about 5 and getting ready to go to school, I knew I didn't want to raise her in Albuquerque schools. I couldn't afford the private schools. And the Albuquerque schools were so inundated with gangs and violence and drugs, and I just knew I couldn't do it. So I ventured out to, move. And I got a job in Houston.
What would you just spin the globe and just,
Well, actually, I went to a convention. I was in the printing business at the time, and I went to a convention, and I met someone. He said, if you ever decide to move out of Albuquerque, give me a call. And I did, and here I am.
Wow.
So I packed up my daughter, and friends packed up a truck and drove me off to Houston.
To Houston from Albuquerque.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes. And, now that I think about, I knew that I needed to get out of Albuquerque. I knew my daughter needed to get out of Albuquerque. I knew that I couldn't thrive there. I didn't know why.
Yeah.
I just knew that there was a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And I was not hanging with people that were good for me. So so when I came here, I thought I was going to start over. What I didn't realize was what all that meant, was how much that meant.
Yeah.
So after I was here for a couple of years, 4 years actually, a friend of mine, I was getting more and more depressed again. And a friend of mine said, there is a place that I started going to because my brother is a drug addict. And I started going to this thing called Al-Anon. And she said, I don't know if they can help you or not, but it's free therapy.
Wow.
Which, as a single mom,
Let's
sounded
go.
really, really good, right? So I went in there, and I just remember all of oh my gosh, I cannot believe all this time I thought alcohol was the solution to life.
Yes.
And now I'm hearing it's actually the problem. And it was the problem in my family all along, that it wasn't ever meant to be a solution to life.
Right.
And so when I started hearing that and understanding and thinking about, my daughter and myself and, just our lives, and then started, of course, looking at my own drinking. And it was probably about 5 months before I actually picked up my chip in alcoholism, in AA, as we call it, and got sober.
So your entrance into the rooms was through Al-Anon, and you were there. I would imagine the folks that received you there were just
Loving
open to you and
absolutely
your story and what had happened. And were you able to share yourself in that space?
Well, not in the beginning. But, in the beginning, I just sat in the back of the room and cried. That was pretty much all I could do.
Why?
Just because there were so many things that were spoken that were exactly my story. There were so many things that the feelings that people were expressing were things that I had expressed. Somebody was talking about driving around and around and around on the freeway, kept missing their exit because they were so zoned out. I call that a Al-Anon blackout.
Yes.
Where you're so focused on out that you don't really recognize what's going on in your world. And when I heard, that was the first time I heard anybody talk about that experience that I'd had.
Wow.
So the more people talked, the more pain started coming out for me. And also hope. For the first time in, a long time, I felt some hope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. What was that like to feel hope?
I still feel it. I still feel that. And every time I work with an alcoholic or an addict or a family member or someone, I can feel that hope again and that, what that's like, just that, after a while you start feeling the joy coming up from your toes, right?
Yeah.
It's like it's just coming up and
irrepressible.
out.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
But you have to empty out the space enough to allow it to come in, to allow God to come in and do the healing. And that was really what I did. That was the start of my journey.
Yeah. So Al-Anon, for folks that don't know, is really it's a group for folks that love addicts or have been affected by alcoholism or drugs. Or
Yes.
really, I think by any powerless behavior in
Right.
folks' life.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's really about how can I take care of myself in the midst of insanity,
Yeah.
in the midst of, irresponsible behavior or, some other.
Mm-hmm. So you're Al-Anon, you go pick up a chip in AA, that starts this journey for you.
Mm-hmm.
Like how you have this this moment in as a kid with a nurse that you think there's something about this moment of sharing space with somebody and just listening. So how did that move you to become a therapist, a counselor, to work with other addicts? Like what was that?
Yeah.
How did you get there?
Well, I think it's, when I think about it now, and, we hear this term connection a lot, and really that's what it is. And that's, when I had that spiritual experience, now I think about it in a way of that was my first real connection, where I felt connected to myself and to a power greater than me,
Yes.
as well as to others. And I believe that, we've heard it said that alcoholism is the opposite of alcoholism is connection.
Yeah,
It's not
that's right.
sobriety, it's connection.
Yeah.
And that's, my family was so split, there was no real connection because of the addiction. And so when I realized that was a power that was given to me, that I was able to connect into other people and connect into support for myself and reach out and support others. I mean, certainly when I started in AA, I was depressed again. My depression was pretty severe at that time. And I remember sitting down and thinking about, see someone get up and get a cup of coffee for their neighbor. They'd get themselves some coffee and offer the neighbor. And I thought, wow, I don't think anyone would want to accept coffee from me. That I wasn't even worthy to get someone else coffee, right? I just had to hide in my little corner. And so when I started being able to give back and to be there for other people in a way that where they were feeling some help or some relief or,
Yeah, right.
that for me was such a affirmation of life and of God, of, that here we are all together and everybody's just doing the best they can.
Right.
And how can I best support them in that?
Beautiful.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So when you you have a daughter. You're in Houston. How do you make the move from printing to to counseling? Like what's that?
It wasn't easy, that's for sure.
Yeah, you're in your 20s
And recovery at the same time.
I mean, there's
That's
a lot
right.
of change going on.
Oh, a lot of change, yeah. So when I first got into recovery, I was going to meetings, almost every day, and I would take her if there was childcare. Sometimes there would be childcare available at the same time, so I would take her and have her there. At that time, when I got sober, she was 9, and they had what they called pre-Alateen.
Yeah.
And so she would go into to those meetings, and I would go into my AA meeting or Al-Anon meeting, whatever I was doing at the time. And so we both kind of grew up in recovery. We grew up
great.
together in recovery.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then at some point, I decided that it was okay for me to go back to school, and that I knew it was a desire that I had. So by now she's in middle to high school. And so I started doing evening classes, working during the day, and then doing evening classes 3 nights a week. And then she would stay with someone. They would keep her at night until I got off school.
Wow.
So I went, I did that until I graduated. And it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience.
Yeah.
And I loved being in school. I loved it.
Yeah. Me too.
First time in my life, I loved it.
Did you? You wanted to be there.
I sure didn't want to be there in high school.
Right? No, one of the things that I know that you've talked about before, and I just love the concept that addiction really is a family disease.
Absolutely. Yeah.
That it's a part of, like, often we atomize, we make like the single person, what is your problem?
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and the whole family is great to collude in that, right?
Yeah, right.
Let's fix that one because
Yes.
we don't have any problems.
Right. So
Yeah.
when I just in telling your story, I mean, you can see that, like, there's dynamics within your family that are your mother. We don't talk about this. We've got broad shoulders.
Right,
Don't
right.
tell anybody that you're
Right.
seeking help. Right. So could you talk a bit about the addictive process as a family disease?
Sure.
What that means?
Yeah. So, they've been doing this research around addiction for a long time. I think the 70s it started getting really popular with John Bradshaw and Pia Mellody and Melody Beattie and
Right.
all the old
Everybody
classics.
at Hazleton.
That's right. Everybody at Hazleton. Yeah. So, all of that research was happening right when I was getting sober. So I was learning a lot about the family, not to mention how I learned about it from going to Al-Anon and realizing how much it had affected my family.
Yeah.
So I really kind of came in from this systems viewpoint, where we are all we're all living in community with each other, and our wounds all happen in community with each other, and so our healing happens in community with each other. And until we really see how our behavior affects other people's behavior and affects that we all do this together. And so when the alcoholic usually will say something like, I wish they'd just leave me alone. This has nothing to do with them. It doesn't affect them, right? So the alcoholic can say that. And they don't recognize, or my kids don't know. This is one of my favorites. My kids don't know because they never see me drink. And the reality is your behavior in between drinks is affected. Your availability, they may not see you drink, but if you've been drinking, you are not cognitively available as you would be, and you're certainly not emotionally available as you would be, because all of that is getting numbed out by the alcohol, right, or hidden by the drugs. Right. I remember thinking when my daughter was little, and I'd been sober for just a short time, maybe about 6 months, and we were sitting at the table, and she spilt some milk. And she looked at me, and the look on her face was fear. And I thought, why would my daughter be afraid because she spilt milk? It made no sense to me. And the only sense I could make of that was my drinking, right? And so, just that, and I remember thinking, I couldn't even really see her for who she is when I was in my addiction. I couldn't see anything around me other than the addiction, the alcohol, the drug, right? And so, and I didn't realize it at the time. When you're in that, you don't really, it's like being in the forest. You don't know you're there. But when I came out, when I got sober, I realized how much I'd been missing. And so we are affected. Our families are affected. Our whole world, it affects those around us. It affects who we stay with, or who we're friends with. It affects everyone. And so the other thing I was thinking about in thinking about this was that, I grew up water skiing.
Okay.
We went water skiing a lot. My parents were really high functioning alcoholics, very high functioning. And we had a boat and we would go water skiing. And if you're water skiing during the week, it's pretty nice, glassy water. You don't really have much interference. You're just out there doing your thing, right? But if you go on 4th of July weekend, you are bounced around by other people's waves, and everything is, your whole stability is affected by all the things going on around you, right? And if a boat is going fast, it's going to affect you in one way. If it's going slow, it'll affect you in another. If it's turning really hard, it'll, so it's kind of, it's like that, just trying to stay alive, to stay up, to stay, keep your head above water is kind of what it's like living in an alcoholic system or a dysfunctional system.
That's really true. I think about like your story and mine, others, probably every other person on the planet that's like has dealt with something that's really difficult as a child or as a young adult, and to not have adequate resources, or even to have resources stymied, like aren't able to come your way. Like the family system still, like they're impacted by it, and everybody's, I think about your brother, everybody's grieving.
Everybody.
And but if there's no permission or at least container or pathway of that, then I mean it just makes so much sense to reach out to anything that would numb it.
Yeah.
Anything.
That's right. Certainly that's what that did. And that was, what my parents did. That's how everybody dealt with it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. When we think about addiction and, kind of growing up when I was in, I think it was high school or even maybe even college, the first, I think, addict I ever saw on TV was Sam from Cheers, right? But there was such a stigma around addiction, and it feels like within the last 10 or 15 years that that stigma is still there in some addictions for sure.
Correct. But
that it seems like that we've moved down the path a little more to saying, hey, this is a disease. Actually probably everybody's doing, we've all got something we're carrying and that we're attempting to deal with in probably not so helpful ways.
Right.
How have you seen things change and could you just talk about, that a bit and some misperceptions of what addiction is? Sure.
Well, the misperceptions are probably about the same as they've always been.
Okay. Yeah.
Right? The stigma has changed for alcoholism, I think. Not so much for the drugs, though.
Yeah.
Maybe a little bit. For marijuana, it's changed quite a bit, but not for some of the other drugs.
Yeah.
But the misconceptions, my favorite one, and the one that I hear most often is that if I'm not down and out, if I'm not living on the street or drinking under a bridge,
I always
if
go
I'm not strung out
to the naked guy under the bridge with a paper bag.
Always.
I'm not that guy. Still got some ways to go,
That's
folks.
right. That's exactly.
I don't need treatment. I got pants on.
That comedian that said rock bottom has a little bit of wiggle room.
Yeah, right.
That's right.
Even rock bottom has a little
There's
bit of
always a
wiggle room.
basement.
There's always a basement. Give me a shovel.
I'll dig my own.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
So
that
the-
is it. I mean,
yeah.
that's the misperception, and the reality is the NIH, the National Institute of Health,
Yeah.
9% of the population, the addicted population, are those people. 9%.
Wow. Okay.
20% are high educated, or well educated, high functioning, earning the highest, the top amounts in our society. That's about 20% of them. So somewhere you fall in the middle of that, and which, most people fall, they don't recognize it
Yeah.
because it's not that 9%.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also because who wants to be an alcoholic? I mean, really.
Yeah. That's nothing anybody ever says in their 6th grade class. So what do you want to be when you grow up?
I'm going to grow up and be
I'm
an
gonna be a
alcoholic.
recovering alcoholic. That's really funny. Where does addiction come from? Like,
Oh, interesting question. I think that's still being answered. It's not been completely answered.
Yeah.
Right? They're still working on it. It certainly is a different functioning in the brain.
okay.
So people who have an addiction, their brain functions differently than others. And they've shown that it does pass down through generations.
Yes.
Right? That's
Yeah.
proven. There is a genetic predisposition.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really in how the genes are expressed, not necessarily what genes you have, but how they are expressed. And so that is passed down from generation to generation. And even sometimes it can change the way it looks in generations. So where this generation was addicted to, maybe back in the 1800s, they were addicted to opium,
Yeah.
right?
Which is just like heroin, right? Isn't that crazy?
That's right. Smoking opium,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
And then, coming down to alcoholism, and then, maybe even process addiction, which
Yeah.
is sex addiction, or
Gaming.
food
and-
addiction,
yeah,
gaming,
yeah.
right? So it does change faces. However, it is still passed down through generations. That is shown to be proven, right? So, and then the other thing is you can use enough or do enough of something to change the functioning of your brain permanently. So you don't have to have it in a generation in the family. However, it's quite possible you do
Yeah.
somewhere along the line.
Yeah, yeah. It always seems that the folks that I've talked to, and I don't know if this is true, but that often addiction starts in a place of pain. That there's not, like, I know for me, like, I felt like I was up against too much, and I didn't know how to talk about it. And even if there was like loving people there, for me, I don't know if I would have been able to say how alone or how shamed I felt or how
Right.
powerless I was to face the things that I was up against.
Right. Right.
And so often having a painkiller that I think I can manage for a little while, it was really good.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and especially, I'm glad you mentioned shame, because that is one of the biggest, catapults for people.
Is it?
Sure, yeah.
Talk about that. Like,
Well, a lot of us grow up, even in with all the bullying and abuse that happens in social media, and not my day, we didn't have social media, but we we certainly had word of mouth media, right?
yeah. Yeah.
So with all of that, there was always a shame base. Growing up in a family that had secrets, right, that nobody could talk about.
Yes.
That's about shame, right? That's
Yes.
very shame-based. What's wrong with me? Or growing up feeling different
Yes.
than others.
Yeah.
What is wrong with me? Those are all shame-based. And one of the best things to do to relieve that shame is to distract. And whether it's distracting with an alcohol or a drug or food or, something something else to help your brain to focus on something else. And most chemicals are painkillers of some sort.
Yes.
Right? So alcohol is definitely a painkiller for a time
Yeah.
until you wake up.
Yeah, and it's not so much. It's a lot of other things, but
But the truth is I think most young people, when they start out, it's really to have fun. It's to get along with their peers, maybe to
Yeah.
fit in and to have
blow
fun.
off steam, all that. Yeah.
Right. So it isn't always born out of pain.
Okay. Yeah.
However, what you learn, though, when you first use something is that you can change the way you feel at any time.
100%.
And once you've learned that, then I can be happier, or
Yeah.
I feel really miserable, and I can change that.
Yeah. I can lower my inhibitions. I can talk to somebody I wouldn't talk to. I can do
Right.
things I wouldn't do.
Yeah.
All that good stuff that never had any problems in my life. Yeah. Okay. So that so as a therapist, then like dealing with the addiction, often are you looking for what's behind that? You're in some ways saying, hey, I'd like to figure out like the things behind these things to deal with what's kind of the fueling.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, one without the other is just, behavior modification.
Okay. Yeah.
And behavior modification works for a time,
Mm-hmm.
and it has its place, definitely. I mean, we all have to do some behavior modification. If I don't get to the underneath stuff, the stuff that's feeding it, even mothers who get into recovery, who've been, say they're alcoholic and they've been drinking during the day, or they've been, they have their things that they've done during their drinking. And they all come around with this shame about their mothering, right? What did I miss? What did I do wrong? We have that. And I know men have it too. But when I talk to women, if you don't talk about that stuff and work on that shame around your parenting and really, lay it out there, this is what I did, and reduce some of that shame, you have a much higher chance of relapsing. Right. So getting even to the behaviors as an adult, not even digging into the childhood stuff, you have to get to all of that. You have to go to what's feeding.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's so interesting that, like you had said before, the opposite of addiction isn't recovery's connection.
Yeah.
Right. And the fact that like there's so much stuff inside of us that if we grew up in families where maybe the unspoken was don't talk, don't feel.
Don't trust. Don't feel.
Trust.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Right.
That's
Oh, yeah.
really, yeah. That's
Those
really
three.
true. Those three horsemen of the apocalypse.
That's right. Exactly.
Yeah. Don't talk, don't feel, don't trust.
Mm-hmm.
Then to get into a space where you're being summoned, invited to talk, to feel, to trust, must feel like a really deep, counterintuitive space that, I mean, I feel like when it started for me, I knew that needed to increase in my life. I was just really afraid.
Oh, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. Yeah. And then the feeling of betrayal. I feel like I'm betraying my family if I tell the family secrets. And
Dang,
you
right.
know, yeah.
What is that? That's you look back on it, it's friggin' nutty, but it's like so true.
It is.
Like if I say this, I'm betraying a whole family.
Right.
I'm
Yeah.
my father, my mother. I mean, I'm betraying them.
If I talk about how I was hurt, that it's betraying others.
And some people hold on to that long after the people that they don't want to betray are dead.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It has nothing to do with whether they're dead or alive, really. It's about what we're carrying inside and the messages we learned.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I'm interested to know how, like, you've seen in the field of addiction change since you entered it. Not that you've been there since Bill W. or anything, but I'm just saying.
I hope not.
You dated Bill W., didn't you?
All right, Matt. You said you wouldn't make
That was
any
a
age
joke.
jokes.
No, that was a joke.
You promised no age jokes, and there you are. Yeah. I edited the big book.
What I
First
mean
round.
is that you are wise beyond your years.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, a lot has changed, and
Okay.
the main thing really is the research. The way we treat addiction has changed too, because they have found out that it used to be all about shaming and attacking, and right. So, and we found out that really people don't change for the long term with shame. That is not a motivator.
Right. Shame is not a motivator.
It motivates me to crawl in a hole, is what
Right.
it does, right? Not to change, at least not for the long haul.
That's right.
Yeah. But the research that's happening and the brain studies are just fascinating. I love that.
Do you?
I love that stuff. Yeah. And they're able to image the brain and the neuroactivity that's happening not just when the alcohol or drug is in the system, which they can do, but also when you're just thinking about it, right?
Yes.
When you're just planning the drink, they can watch the neuroactivity just spark,
Wow.
yeah. Or just watching someone else get high they had one study they did where they did the brain imaging. They were showing someone, he had been sober from crack cocaine for 5 years. And he was, they were showing him overhead a video of a mountain scene with a stream, and they were watching his neuroactivity, and it was calm and blue, and then they showed someone lighting a crack pipe, and when he saw that, his brain just lit up like fireworks, and
Wow.
5 years. After 5 years of being clean, his brain reacted to that as if it had just been yesterday.
Wow.
Or as if he was smoking it himself.
Wow.
Yeah, it's powerful,
Wow.
the phenomena of craving. The other thing that I want to mention that they have done so much research on is what happens to the fetus when the mother is drinking. And there is one study that really stays with me. I was one of the state chairs for the fetal alcohol spectrum disorder Texas State Coalition.
Okay.
And one of my co-chair is a researcher at Texas A&M.
Okay.
And they did this rat study where they introduced the equivalent of one drink into the mother rat. Mm-hmm. And then they watched the trajectory of that alcohol going through the system of the mother into the fetus, and then going through the fetus and just engulfing the entire central nervous system. And they measured the amount of alcohol in that fetus's system, and there was a point where the fetus maintained a higher level of alcohol in it, per ounce or whatever,
Yeah,
right?
per volume.
A higher,
Yeah.
per volume, a higher level of alcohol than the mother.
Wow.
And it took a long, long time for that fetus to process the alcohol out because the systems were not
Designed to do that.
well. They weren't there yet,
Yeah.
right? Your digestive
That's
system
right.
isn't completed
Yeah.
yet. Even at 9 months,
Wow.
it's just barely,
Wow.
it's still developing, right? So, at any point, just one drink, they could watch that going through the fetus and how it affected the fetus. It's just fascinating.
It's amazing.
Yeah, they've done so much in the way of research.
Yeah. I love that part of that stigma change is based on that research to say, hey, number one, it's a disease.
Yes,
it's a family
absolutely.
disease. Like shame doesn't work.
Right.
Imprisoning everyone that is an addict does not work. What works is connection.
What works is connection. And they've done a lot of research around that.
Okay.
It's really funny because William White, I don't know if you know
No,
who he is.
no.
He wrote what they call the White Papers.
Okay.
But he did a lot of work around what works in recovery for people. And some of the things that he identified were all the things that you find in 12-step programs.
Okay.
But the number one was, of course, connection. And connection not just with people, but with people that you can talk to, that you can, that you can connect with, at a I see you level, right?
Okay.
It's not just,
Yeah.
we're just
Yeah.
not talking about the weather or
Yes.
debating something. We are, really seeing each other. And that's what the kind of connection they get in the 12-step meetings. That's the kind of connection I got in Al-Anon that led me into recovery. So that was one of the key things. The other was talking through the things that you have done, right? So getting rid of some of that baggage that you're carrying.
Okay.
Talking through some of the things that have happened to you and different connections, owning your part in life and, what you can change and what you can't change. So gaining, admitting that you're powerless over, the drug itself, or people, places, and things, right? Like
Right.
over other people, you actually gain power because you start to understand that I do have control over me and how I behave. And so what they recognized was that people that stay connected, that stay and helping others, that was another big piece, right? That continue to do that and make that a part of their life. That those are the people that maintain long-term recovery.
It's amazing to me that when it gets down to it, like being human and vulnerable with each other, maintaining authentic connection, not
Yes.
like you're saying, having a space where you can tell secrets, that's, I think in some ways, that's what I was hoping the church was going to be early on,
Right.
and it can be. I still have deep hope that I'm not quite
You're not
ready
giving
to,
up on it yet?
I have given up on it 1,000 times, but I keep coming back because I think that's the hope that in so many ways, for folks that don't identify as having a possible addiction, could find that same I think one of the best things that ever happened to church is that they started allowing all these other meetings to happen in the church,
Right.
and that some of these folks started going to Sunday morning, going, "Hey, wait a minute, I can tell the truth here with these people.
Right.
I hope maybe I can." And to the churches that allow themselves to be affected by folks in recovery, I think there's a deep, powerful place that happens.
Absolutely, sure.
Yeah.
I have a question. When it comes to, this is like a parenting question because I think about my own parents. And my parents' grandparents had a lot of alcoholism in that kind of generation. And then the next two generations were so anti anything that it almost created in my family this like hush hush shame, alcohol's a sin, which then in my siblings and a lot of my generation like whack-a-mole its head up as
Right.
like a rebirth of what is alcohol, what is substances. So when I'm thinking about your parents who raised you where it was like alcohol's okay,
Right.
and then the other side is like alcohol is very shameful, but the effect almost ends up being the same.
Yeah.
So glad you brought that
Yeah.
up because that is exactly the truth.
So I wonder like
It's the rigidity. It's the
I'm wondering like
Yeah.
the cycle of alcoholism or drug addiction, substance abuse is not always in the use of that substance. It can be in the shame of it that then in the next generation can. I'm wondering like how do you if you come from a family of substance abuse, how can you kind of remove the shame from that without saying like everything's fine, but also
Right.
not saying like we don't talk about drinking, we don't talk about
Right.
drugs,
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
so bad.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering from like a parental standing or looking at the next generation, how can you remove shame from some of those things?
Absolutely. Thank you. Such a wonderful question because the truth is people do tend to polarize, right? They
Yeah.
one family goes this way and the other one goes way over to the other
Yeah,
side.
yeah.
And there's a lot of dysfunction in both ends. Right. So,
Right.
but I remember when I quit drinking, when my daughter was in high school, she said to me, Mom, because I became very rigid and it's bad, after I quit
Yeah,
and realized
yeah.
how much it had done to my family and all of that.
Right.
And she said, Mom, I really don't know what normal or what okay drinking is. Because, it's either you're an alcoholic or it's really, really bad. And so I had not given her the tools to understand, what that was.
Yes.
And so I've corrected that by talking to my grandchildren about these are the signs you look for, right? This is when it's okay, and this is when it starts to be problematic. So I've done that with my grandchildren. But, that the characteristics that happen, we call that the ism of the family, is even if the alcohol isn't present or the drug isn't present in the family, we carry down the characteristics, the things that we learned in our family before us.
That's really good.
So it's the ism that you're talking about there. Because the family is still affected. Remember, we're all in community. We're all learning in the system. And the coping skills your family use, they have passed down to you, even if the alcohol isn't a part of that or the drug.
That's interesting. So you're saying in some ways there's a bipolarness that you can have
Absolutely.
one set of a family system that's just like, that has no brakes on it. You're picking up your dad, getting a drink, having a beer in the car on the way home. There's that. And then there's families like the one maybe Jeff and I grew up in, which was like, it was considered to be sin to even think about that, to ever do that, to touch that. And then you add any, basically it was anything you had a craving for was sin. Right. And so then you hold on to that so long until it either you just, you bust open and that dam cannot hold, or you find yourself in midlife having done all the quote unquote right things, and tragedy hits you because you think, if I did all this right, I'm going to get a pass on something, and it still falls apart.
Yep.
Right. So both of the approaches often to the way that we manage ourselves are messed up,
Absolutely.
And so then the recovery is not the recovery from drugs and alcohol. It's often just the recovery of life, and how do I live, and how do I have relationships, and
how do I stay afloat?
Yeah.
Right.
Yes.
And not use dysfunctional coping skills, which is what we learned.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's good. What gives you hope today in this field?
You give me hope, Matt.
Someone as far down as I went.
That's right. If Matt can do it, we can all do it.
You may not be too far off.
Well, the truth is, it's anyone that's talking and telling the truth and reaching out and helping others, and that gives me hope. When I see. Well, my daughter, who, I worked really hard to not raise her in that system, and see her flourishing in her life, and my grandkids doing great, and, so far, I see that, and that gives me hope. I think on a day-to-day basis, when I'm working with another person, and I see those awarenesses happening, and I see some of the gifts and the promises that they talk about in Alcoholics Anonymous, that, that things that are coming true in their lives that they would have never have even guessed. I would never have guessed that I would be sitting here across from you doing a podcast about alcohol and other drugs and recovery. And, who would have guessed that? I mean,
it's a gift.
A kid coming over from running away from Albuquerque, New Mexico. And, it's just all the multitudes of gifts that I see people get every single day, and I hear about it. And that's what gives me hope.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
So if there's somebody in my family that's struggling, and or I wonder if they're struggling, and I discover something with my kids or my partner or somebody that I love, and I call you, I call your office and your practice. Like, what happens? Like, if I finally had the courage, or at least the desperation sometimes, to say, "Oh,
usually,
I'm calling Linda."
Well, when I hear from the person who's abusing, it's usually the morning after.
Okay, yeah.
So they're in that desperation. When I hear from the family members, there might be, they're going to try something else. Let me try to help them in another way. Let me try to, because they have to have exhausted all of their resources for them to make that call.
So true.
Right?
Right.
And once they have seen that they really don't have any control over what their family member or their loved one is doing, then they're calling me and asking for help. And so what that looks like is I'll get a phone call and, this is what's going on with my family member, and I'm really scared, or I'm really upset, or I'm angry, or, and I don't know what to do. I mean, that's always the bottom line.
Right.
I don't know what else to do.
Yes.
And so we just have a brief conversation. We make an appointment, and we meet for the first time and really gather all the information that we can. Right. So I gather all the information I can, and then from there we make a plan of action.
Okay.
So, how many people are involved? What all are what are some of the resources that the addicted person might have? What are some of the things you've tried that haven't worked? Right? So we go through all of that, and then we make a plan. And sometimes that plan is an intervention.
Okay.
So a formal intervention where, I go in and lead it like you see it on TV, kind of,
Yeah.
right? My interventions are a lot different, though, because I never come from a shaming, demanding place. It's always from a loving, I'm scared.
Yeah.
I'm concerned about you. Right, so that's the place we come from when we do any kind of an intervention on someone, because that's what works. Right, people don't respond well to banging your fist on the table and you will do this.
Yeah.
Right. So, and sometimes the family wants to do an intervention themselves, and so I train them and I help to talk them through what that looks like, and if the person is going to treatment, what that will look like, and help you set that all up. A lot of the times the family just wants an ear, just wants some support, wants to know they're not crazy, and how they can live in this environment that is so dysfunctional.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So whatever that looks like, that's where we go from there.
I have personally witnessed the power of intervention, done well. I've watched folks like you that are really good at that stand in that space of desperation, as a non-anxious, courageous, loving,
Right.
open, resolute space that is able then to, there's a verse out of Isaiah that talks about, God making a way where there's no way.
Yeah. Absolutely.
And often
Yeah.
when families come up against addiction and they reach out to someone like you, there is no way. Right.
Oh yeah, and that's what I hear. It's never going to work.
This is not going to work. Yeah. I've said it myself. Right.
Sure.
In things in my own family system, and to have a presence of someone like you stand in that space, is, there's something. Whatever I think salvation at the root word means to be made whole. There's something about that Genesis, that seed that's planted, about wholeness there. And so, amazing.
Yeah.
So I show up and I call you and I'm just whacked out of my mind.
Hopefully you're sober.
I'm
But
sober. Okay. Let me say it like this, maybe a
not
little more.
sober. I'll say, call me tomorrow.
You'll call me tomorrow. If I am wondering, why can't I quit? And maybe I'm a high functioning, person that's, crushing it in a lot of parts of my life. They're really happy and, family, all that. I was like, I can't stop this, and I finally had the courage to call you. What happens?
Well, usually the first call I get, they're telling me all the reasons they're not an alcoholic or an addict. At the same time, they're saying, I do have a problem though, and I need some help.
Right. Okay.
So then we do the same thing. We make an appointment, and I do a full, comprehensive, what I call an assessment, where we just meet and talk for an hour and a half, and I get to know what's functioning and what's not functioning in their lives, what their strengths are, and where their strengths are not working too well.
Yes.
So we look at all the different areas of their life. And then together, we make a decision about what would be the best move forward. So sometimes if there's, if you're using opiates, or if you're using alcohol every day, then it probably is going to take some detox. So I will have to refer you to a place that does detox.
Yeah.
But then we will also have a plan of action for when that's completed, right? Are you going to need residential treatment, or is that not an option for you? And then, we have some very intense programs at KAGEY Family Counseling, so outpatient programs. So is that going to work for you? And maybe you're at a level where you just need one-on-one counseling.
Yeah.
And then probably you're going to need some family intervention, some family counseling. And so we have a family counselor. If there's trauma happening, we have a trauma therapist who does EMDR or sand tray therapy, which I love. Wow. If you've never done it, it's fun. Go find someone that does it. It's so much fun. Well,
sand tray therapy. I was going to say, is that just like going to the beach?
It is.
I go to the beach.
As long as you take your little sand tray.
Okay.
Yeah, so we have, it's all so individualized because everyone is different. The addiction looks the same. It kind of plays out the same in most people's lives, and yet it has so many different variances and differences depending on the person and their personality and their life circumstance.
Yeah, I love that. That's wonderful.
I have another question.
It's not a
That's good.
I'm asking. Long-time listener, first-time caller. Go ahead, Jeff.
Would you like to make an appointment?
Asking for a friend.
I have a question for the person that's watching their relationship to alcohol change throughout their life. So college, you've engaged with alcohol in kind of a party phase.
Bingey way.
Yeah,
way,
right.
And then you've moved into a career. I drink with clients. I drink with coworkers from time to time. Is there a marker that you can recognize as a person that's going through those phases where you could say, okay, I think this is now transitioning from an okay use, if there is such a thing, to a usage where, okay, I can see this becoming a problem.
This is a problem.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Is there a marker, and then what kind of things could people look out for?
Well, thank you. Really, really great question.
He's basically asking, how close can I get?
Yeah, exactly.
How much can I drink and not come to see you, Linda?
How far can I push this?
How much is the psilocybin microdosing?
How often do you have to microdose? At what level? Well, yeah, so it really is a great question, and it's one that everybody asks, right? So, because most people in high school and college that are using to get drunk, bottom line.
Yes.
That's why they're going.
Yeah, right.
I just want to get drunk.
Not for the taste.
Yeah, it's not for the taste,
saying.
not for society. They're not
Yeah.
out having a glass of wine. They are getting drunk. And so, when does that become a problem? Well, it's really funny because you can kind of see the difference in the way that someone reacts to an especially heavy drinking episode. Because someone who is not potentially going to have a problem with say, alcohol, is they will wake up from a really high drinking episode and say, man, I don't know what happened because I don't remember everything that happened last night. And I am never doing that again. Right? It scares them. Right? And then there's the other one that goes, wow, we had so much fun.
Jeff, want to come back over tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Wow.
I don't remember it, but I'm sure I must have had fun.
That's really true.
Yeah. So that's kind of the beginning of it. And then, when it gets to a point where, and this is really we talk about how many consequences have built up, like not remembering everything, like a DUI, or, insulting your boss, or, all of
Not
these
being there for your
consequences.
kids.
How many of them, have built up? and I'm still continuing to drink, right? So that's another one. The one that I think of the most, that is the most telling, is when I drink, and this is the one that really, I guess, spoke to me, is why it so stands out so much. When I drink, I cannot accurately predict how much I'm going to drink. So sometimes I can stop at 2, and sometimes don't get between me and my third.
That's good.
Wow. So recapping.
Is this hitting home, right, Matt? Is that
No, I think that's really beautiful
Yeah.
because in some ways you're saying that in the face of increasing consequences, I still persist in this behavior.
correct?
So, and that's addiction. That's having an attachment to something
Right.
that's no longer being helpful in the face of consequences. You're still persisting in this behavior.
Correct.
Okay. So that's one of the things to attend to and to look at and to say, is that happening in my life? Is that happening in my family's life? Okay. The other is you show up at a, say, particularly with alcohol, you show up at a party and say, I'm going to have 1 beer. 4 beers in, you're wondering, well, screw it, I'll have 5. You know, whatever. You know,
Exactly.
but so
Right.
is that then that you there's a limit that you set for yourself or something, and that you
Or
can,
even, probably by that time you've already had several episodes of drinking too much, right?
Okay.
So I'm going to a wedding. I'm not going to drink so much at that wedding, right? So I'm not going to get drunk, in other words, or
Yes.
or I go to a work party and I'm going to moderate,
yes,
right? And then, but you find that you can't always do that. Sometimes you can, but you can't always do that. And it's when you lose the predictability, when you can't accurately predict how much you're going to drink once you get started. That's when you know, at least not every time, right? So you can accurately predict whenever you drink how much you're going to drink. That's the real key. And the reason I don't mention the consequences as much is because we are really, really good at deceiving ourselves. So,
Dear Lord,
I know I
right?
got a DUI, but it was that cop.
yeah,
It wasn't me drink. It was the cop, right? If he hadn't-
100% it was that cop.
It's my wife. She has no.
100%.
She just wants. She wants me to be a teetotaler.
I wouldn't
you
drink
know?
so much if it weren't for my kids.
Oh yeah, exactly. Right.
So I think that's really, because it's a sneaky little thing,
Oh,
right?
very sneaky.
Because it's not like, I have all this trauma, therefore I drink. I mean, it's like,
No.
it's such a pervasive thing in our culture, the multiplicity of ways and things that we have access to that distract, that numb, that, right? And so there's just so many ways to be numb.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Coping.
to
that's,
cope.
That's what we use to cope.
Yeah.
And you hear it, socially acceptable every day. It's been a really hard day. I just want to go home and have a glass of wine or a drink.
Yeah.
Right? You earned this. I watch the morning news shows sometimes, Today Show and that type of thing, and they're drinking. Not always, not every day.
In the
but,
morning?
Yeah. I mean, sometimes they'll serve food, and there's always wine to go with it, or they're or they're talking about when we have a break, we're gonna
Yeah.
But it's a part. It's part of it.
That's really true. Every movie that I'm watching now or TV show, all that just normalizes, And I think in some ways, like particularly in some of the culture we live in, even, in Houston, to not drink is an oddity, and there's some of my friends that are even now kind of looking at this, wondering, I'm going to step back from this and give it, I'm just going to test drive not having this in my life for a while. And some of the biggest pushback comes from the culture that they're in.
Well, that's the first thing I hear.
Really?
Is how can I not drink? All my friends drink. My work, I'm a salesperson, and I have to go out drinking with clients. And
Right.
how can I not drink? Because my life is built around it. Society is built around it.
It's a real thing.
It is. Yeah.
If you could grant a person that walks through your door one superpower of virtue for 3 days, just for 3 days, to give them a head start, what would you give them?
Superpower of virtue.
Another way of saying that.
Can you reword that?
Yeah. If you could grant them one thing that they needed that would give them a head start on the journey of waking up, what would you give them early on?
Awareness is what just keeps coming back to me. Having that, I remember having the paradigm shift. I remember clearly when it happened that I saw it turn from the solution to the problem.
Okay.
So having that shift in my vision, the awareness of the truth, started me on a journey that was, it's life-changing, lifelong life-changing. And that's, the thing that I try for the most when I'm working with other people is just, can I just give them a little glimmer of awareness? Can I plant some seeds? Because once they take a hold of it, there's no, I can't predict what's going to happen in their lives, but it's going to be beautiful.
Yes. Yeah. I think early on, that's the fear that it's not going to be beautiful. Mm-hmm. The fear is that, how can I live without this?
Right.
What will I become? What will happen to me? Right? I need this.
because it's foreign. It's like moving to another country and they're speaking a different language.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then that awareness grows to see. There's a psalm in the Old Testament that says, "Open the eyes of my heart, Lord." And I think that has got to be the process of awareness.
Yeah. Exactly.
Oh,
Really
this is
well put.
killing me. It's not helping me.
Yeah. And it's hurting the people around me.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate
Thank you for asking me, Matt.
Yeah.
I really appreciate it.
It's such a gift to this community and to Houston. If folks want to get a hold of you, if there's family members, if they just want to do some deeper work in their own life, how can they get a hold of you?
Phone number, 832-928-0211.
Okay.
Okay. Website.
Yeah.
It's lindakagey.com.
Okay.
And KAGEY is KAGEY. So if you Google me, you can just Google Linda KAGEY, KAGEY.
Okay.
As long as you have the spelling right, you should get it.
Okay. Great. And we'll put all that in the show notes so that folks can get a hold of you and
Great.
Can find out where you're at. And
Great. I have some really marvelous people working with me.
Yeah.
Great teams.
That's great. Well, thank you for being here. We
Thank you,
appreciate it.
Matt.
We'll have to have you back sometime too. So thanks.
Loved it. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm Matt Russell.
I'm Linda KAGEY.
And this is Pod Have Mercy.